Hi, so in this video I'm going to be teaching you basic object-oriented programming in C++. So I'm going to lead this by an example. So here I've got a triangle class. So what we're going to do is we're going to detect whether the three values through objects are an equilateral, an isosceles or a scalene. So this is a basic C++ class. We're going to be using objects, again a class, private variables, and again just to give you an idea on how to use object-oriented programming. And I think it's a really good starter for those who are yet still beginners in C++ and of course in OOP as well. And following on from this video, I will be making a more complex video which I'll be going more into inheritance and polymorphism, using constants as well, looking at pass by reference. So do keep an eye out for that video as well. But I thought that I'll start with something much more easier, and just give you an idea on how to work with objects and how to work with classes and functions as well. So I really do hope you would enjoy this video. So just to give you a little idea of what I'm going to show you. So we have objects here. So the objects have three values, and then it will detect whether it's a scalene, like I said. So a scalene has three sides which are different. So it'll print out scalene. A isosceles has two sides which are the same. So 2 and 2, which is the same, it'll print out isosceles. And an equilateral has three sides which are the same. So that's an equilateral. So I will go more deeper into this whilst I'm programming, so I don't want to really show you my whole code right now, and I think it will be really good just to follow on with me and see what I do as well. So again, I really hope you do enjoy this video and really learn from it as well. So thank you for watching, and yeah, let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to create a new Xcode project, and I'm going to select command line tool. I'm going to click next. I'm just going to name this triangle, and of course make sure your language is C++. Going to click next. Just going to save it on my desktop. Okay, and then your class is created here, so it's called main.cpp. Okay, so now for us it includes the iOS stream, so this is for input and output, so we want to print something, so this will help us do that. I'm also going to include using namespace std. I'll show you why later on we're going to use this. Okay, so now let's get started. So the first thing is we're going to create our class. So we do class triangle, and that's the name of our class, and that's also the name of our project. Okay, so class triangle, I'm just going to do open bracket. Okay, just like that. So now we have our class. So now what we're going to do is going to create some private variables. Okay, so why private? So what private does is it makes sure that these variables are only accessible within the triangle class. So of course, if we had many more classes, you would see how beneficial this is. But since we do have one class, but we are still going to make it private. So we're going to do an int. Actually, no, instead of int, I'm going to use an unsigned int. So an unsigned int basically is for integers which are always going to be positive. So since we are creating a triangle program, we don't want to use any negatives, so -5, -3. We want to make sure our numbers are always going to be positives. So might as well have it as an unsigned int. So we're going to create three variables since triangles have three sides. So unsigned int side A, side B, and side C. Okay. So now, once we're done with the private, we're now going to create our public. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an empty constructor. So I'm just going to have it empty. So we are going to create two constructors. One is going to be empty and the other is going to have three values. But for now, we're just going to do an empty one. You know, maybe you might want to have an empty object somewhere in the program if you're going to use this. So I'm just going to create an empty constructor, and I'm just going to assign each of the variables to 0. So equals 0, this side B equals 0, and also I'm going to also assign the side C to 0, just like that. So maybe in the program you might want to create, like I said, an empty object. It will call this default constructor. And now we're going to create our constructor. Okay, and now inside here we're going to place our values. So it's going to have 3 parameters. So it's going to have int A, int B, and int C. Okay. So now, when we create the object, it's going to, and we're going to have 3 numbers. It's going to call this constructor. So first, let's do an if statement. So we need to make sure that each side has a number more than 0. So we're going to create an if statement saying that if any of the numbers, so if any of the sides, whether A, B or C, is less than 0, we're just going to assign all of them to 0. So this will make sure that whenever we put values, they must be 3 numbers which are more than 0. I mean, if one side is 0 and the other sides are 2 and 5, it's just not going to work. So you either put 3 values which are numbers, or if you decide to put one value as 0, we're just going to make them all 0, which means it won't be a valid triangle. So we're going to do if A is less than 0, or if B is less than 0, or is C less than 0. So if any of them is less than 0, then I'm just going to copy this and assign them to 0. So if the user has 5, 6, 0, C is less than 0, so basically C is 0, so they're all going to be zeros. If we have 2, 5 and 6, that is fine, and then we'll just create an else statement and then we'll assign them. So we do this side A, which is coming from the variable, we'll assign them to A. So whatever the user has as side A, we assign side B to whatever the user has as side B, and we also lastly assign side C, which whatever value the user has as side C. So that we have now an empty constructor which we built, and now we have a constructor with 3 parameters, 3 values. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, okay, let's just create a print. So I don't think I'm going to be using this, but we might do later on and we'll see. So I'm just going to print the sides. So side A, side B, and side C. Okay, so just to quickly recap on why I used namespace std. So if I remove this, so if I just comment this out, what happens is, when it comes to printing, I have to use std dot dot, std dot dot, so with 2 colons. And so if you use namespace instead, you don't have to use them no more, and they'll work without. So there have been some arguments. So some people do say that they find that it is not good to use namespace std. However, for me, when it comes to splitting up my header files and my CPP files, I do tend to not use the namespace inside my header files. But since everything here is in one file, I'm going to use the namespace std. However, I am going to create a following video like I mentioned, and over there I will not be using the namespace std inside my header files, which is the way that many programmers, especially experienced programmers, prefer. But for now I'm just going to use this just to give you just a little, I would say, a start on what it does and how it will make programming much more easier. Okay, so the next step is we're going to create a Boolean method. So we're going to write bool, and then we're just going to name it check if triangle. So in here we check the sides to make sure that in fact we are dealing with a triangle. And then later on we will create another method we can actually check whether it's a triangle or not. So to start off with, we're going to do if side A and side B, okay, is more than side C, and then we're going to do and side C and side B is more than side A, and side A and side C is more than side B. So if all these are fine, we are then going to do return true, and then else return false, just like that. So here we're checking the sides to make sure if they actually do fulfill a triangle. So if side A and side B is more than side C, if side C and B is more than side A, and side A and C is more than side B. So if these are accomplished, it is in fact a triangle with 3 sides. Okay, so now the next step and the last step is we're going to create another method. So here is where we detect whether it's an equilateral, whether it's a scalene, or whether it's an isosceles. So we are going to do void, and I think I'm going to name it, let's name it check triangle type. Okay, and now the first of all we're going to do is we're going to call the Boolean function that we made. So we're going to say if it is not a triangle, so we do if not check if triangle. So if it's not a triangle, we're going to print out, oops, and we're going to print out not a valid triangle. So if this is not successful, it's going to print out not a valid triangle, just like that. And then if that's fine, I mean if it is a valid triangle, then we're going to create an else. Okay, and then we'll just also make one here just to close that. Okay, so then we do else. So now if I just open up here, okay, so here is an equilateral triangle. So with an equilateral triangle, all sides are equal, so they're all the same size. So I'm just going to go back to Xcode. Okay, so now what I'm going to do then, so we have to do if side A is the same as side B, okay, and then we're going to do and if also side B is equal to side C, that is basically an equilateral triangle. So if side A and B is equal to C, and of course C and B is equal to A, that means it's an equilateral triangle. So I'm just going to print, I'm going to write equilateral. So just like that. And then we're going to create an else if statement. So else if, so we have if it's this, we print out equilateral, and then we're going to have else if. So just underneath it, we're going to write else if, and we're going to look at an isosceles. So okay, so with an isosceles, 2 sides are the same size. One is different. So over here, as you can see, this side and this side are equal, they're the same size. So in here, we're going to do else if side A equals side B, or if side B equals side C, or one more, side C equals side A. So if one of these two sides are the same, that is basically an isosceles. So inside here, I'm just going to print that out as well. Okay. And then lastly, we're going to have an else. And lastly, what we are dealing with is a scalene. So with a scalene, it's basically three sides which are not of the same size. So there are three sides of different sizes. So instead of checking that, we can just do else. So it is a valid triangle. I mean, it's not an equilateral, it's not an isosceles, so it must be a scalene. So it's going to do else count scalene. And there you go. So basically we now have our triangle class done. So class triangle, and we'll close it over here. So we have an empty constructor, we have a constructor with three parameters inside here, a print function, a boolean function which checks whether in fact it is a triangle and has three sides, and then lastly the function here is what we check whether it's an equilateral, it's an isosceles, or it's a scalene. Okay, so now that fact, and also we did also make an unsigned int, so since we're going to be only dealing with positive values, we've made it an unsigned int. Okay, so now the next step is we're going to go inside our main. So if I was to split this up, I mean, we could have it in a header file and a CPP file. Again, like I said, this won't be in this video. However, the next video, which I'm going to be making, is going to be much more complex C++. So do check that out, because I will be looking more into inheritance and polymorphism. Okay, so now here inside our int main, I'm just going to remove this. So this is just by default what C++ gives you. And I'm also just going to remove this as well. I mean, it's not really needed right now for me, so I'm just going to remove that. I mean, you can keep it if you want. So now I'm going to create my object. So I just call the class name, which is triangle, and I'm just going to name this one T1. Okay, I'm just going to, let's say, okay, let's do 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then we're going to have our other object. So let's name this one T2, and this one is going to be like 3, 2, 2. Oops. So I think you can tell what this one is since we have 3, 2, 2. This one is basically the isosceles. This one is the scalene. So now let's make an equilateral. So T3, and let's have the size as 3, 3, 3. Okay. Let's also just create an empty object. So I think I'm just going to go more down so you can see at the bottom. There you go. Okay, so triangle T4, I'm just going to leave this as empty. So what this will do, this will call the empty constructor and what assign them to 0. Just like that. Okay, I'm just going to let's create another one actually. Triangle T5. Inside here, I'm going to deal with some negatives. So I'm going to do -1. Let's do -1, 4, and 5. Okay, and lastly, let's do triangle T6, and let's have them all as 0. Okay, just like that. So now I mean, we could just, I mean, do this and then I'll just call each one. So I could just do then T1, whoops, dot check if triangle type. But I'm not going to do that because I don't want to do that for every single one. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array of objects. So I'm going to triangle, and I'm just going to name this, let's do triangles. Okay, so I'm going to name the array as triangles, and then inside here I'm just going to include all the arrays. So I'm going to do T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6, just like that. I'm going to close that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a for loop. So I'm going to do for int I equals 0. If I is less than 6, so we have 6 objects, I then do I++. And then I open this and I do triangles. So the loop, and then I can just do check triangle type. And that's that. Okay. So now if we run this, what we should get is we should get an isosceles, we should get a, no sorry, we should get a scalene, we should get an isosceles, we should get an equilateral. This one should say not a valid triangle. This one's also not a valid triangle because one of them is -1. This one's also a non-valid triangle because it's all zeros. Okay, so now if I run this, and hopefully if I just open this up, yep, there we have it. So we have the scalene, which are 3 sides, which are of different sizes. We have the isosceles, which is 2 sides which are the same and one that's different, and equilateral is 3 equal sides. And then we have an empty object. So what this does, again, the empty object calls the empty constructor, makes them a 0, and of course if they're all sides are 0, it is not a valid triangle. So this was not a valid triangle. Again, because this was -1, inside here we said that if A is less than 0, which it is, it's going to assign all of them to 0, so that's not a valid triangle. And lastly, if it's all zeros, that's not a valid triangle. And of course here, instead of assigning each one of them to the method to identify triangle type, instead we just create a nice little for loop which will make sure that all the objects goes through this method. So this is basically just a very simple object-oriented programming, just to let you get used to how to use the private variables, how to use constructors and passing values, and just using the Boolean function, the print statement, so the count, and again just objects itself. So like I said, I will be making a following up video from this, which will be very different. Again, it's going to look at inheritance and polymorphism. We're going to go more deeper into passing by reference, looking more into using constants, and I think it will just be very different, and I think it will be good also for those who are just getting started with object-oriented programming as well. So do keep an eye out for that video, which is going to come very soon. But I really do hope you've enjoyed this video and you've now got a grasp of how to do object-oriented programming in C++. This is just very basic, like I said, but it's a really good start. I mean, when I was learning C++ and OOP, this is where I started off with, was with the triangle class, and it did really help me. And you can, of course, make this program 10 times better. I'm going to put this inside the description box below, so do feel free to use the source code and just experiment with it, and of course play around. So I really do hope you've enjoyed this video. I mean, if you do, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos, and I hope to see you in my other videos. So thank you for watching.